Hi, and welcome back to my channel where I'm going to cover the Cleric's Domain of the Forge class specialization from Xanathar's Guide to Everything, providing a brief description of the subclass, as well as explain and set up the various features gained. The clerics of this domain are those who generally worship the gods that represent artisans who work with metals. From the simple blacksmith through to the grandmaster craftsman, as long as the artisan is working with metals, they would most likely worship Gond, Onatar, Moradin, Hephaestus, and a few others that you can find in the various supplements. When it's time to clear a mine of an invader, or look for ancient pieces of magic that can be used to craft powerful magical items, people would usually call on the clerics of the forge for help. These clerics, because of that role, gain access to heavier armor proficiencies, and are able to imbue some items with magic for short periods of time due to their worship of the forge gods. But there are also additional benefits they gain as they continue to level up through the ranks of their class, which you will see as we progress with this character. You might say, what character? You don't have one there yet. We'll get to that in a moment. Unlike other classes, however, clerics need to choose their domain at level 1, which makes sense if you think about it for a moment, as clerics need to know who they are worshipping in order for their magic to work. And this is why I don't have a cleric yet, because we have to create one. However, because of this, it essentially means that this video would usually have to cover the cleric from level 1 through to level 20, potentially pushing the length of this video well into the hour or two long time frame. I'm going to try to avoid doing that. I have already completed a life domain cleric, though it was using my old video format, so while it is a bit long-winded, it is possible to get an idea as to what the cleric only features are from that video, and I will try to ensure this video only covers the features from the Forge domain. Although, admittedly, at some point I will go back and redo that first clerical video and update it to use my new format. Additionally, it's not using the table of contents feature yet, so I do apologize for that. I was still learning what video links and formats worked for YouTube, and I was not aware of the table of contents function until much later in that year. So for now, I will link that video in the description below so that we can get into the details of the Forge Domain's features itself. So as I've already stated, I'm going to have to go through and quickly create a character here. And I've already pre-selected some of the information as well as pre-rolled some of the stats. And these were rolled just prior to me recording this video. And I'm going to make use of these going forward. This is the part that I really want to highlight. Because a cleric has to choose their domain at level 1, the minute you click on this button, you will see down here at the bottom that you will have your specialization pop up. And in this particular case, we want the Forge domain. I'm then going to quickly select a few other things. We have no skills yet. I'm going to hold off selecting skills until I've chosen the background here. And I'm not going to add in the additional spells or the multi-class. So I'm going to go ahead and finish the rest of this character creation off camera. I just wanted to point out that when you select the class, you get to choose the domain right there. So there's something I want to point out here. With the updated character wizard, they've recently changed how the inventory option works. Instead of you having a box, if you will, that you have to go through and manually search for things, they're now restricting the choices that you have to essentially that you have on your class sheet here. This way you don't really have to go looking at many of these links anymore. I think this is a big improvement. So I'm going to quickly go through and select all this stuff and then move on until we get to the point where we have the character created. All right, so we now have a character. The only thing I had to do was go in and manually add the insight and religion skills here in order to ensure our background skills came into play. But everything else is pretty much ready to go. The only thing I've noticed is that our cantrips are now included with a overriding group called spells, which is interesting, but that might just be the way that the character wizard now works. Having said that, we can now start looking at the Forge specific features. The first feature your character is going to gain is called Forge Domain Spells, and it is available right at level 1, so immediately after you've selected your class specialization. This feature grants you spells that you will learn automatically at the clerical levels defined. So Heat Metal, for instance, is acquired when your character's clerical level reaches level 3. You gain 2 spells at level 1, but also gain 2 new spells every 2 levels up to level 9, so at levels 3, 5, 7, and 9. These spells do not count against your prepared spells list. In fact, they are always available for you to use and won't impact the number of spells you can prepare each day. But that also means if you decide to swap out your character's spells at a later point in time, you would not be able to swap these spells out. They're there, period. And it does not matter whether these spells are non-clerical or not, because at the time that you're given those spells, for the intensive purposes of your ability to cast them, they become clerical spells. They do, however, still make use of existing spell slots. So if you have 2 first level spell slots here, and you choose to cast Identify twice, then you have to complete a long rest in order for your character to once again be able to cast any first level spells. To keep Forge Domain spells separate, I generally recommend you create a new power group specifically for those spells. So let's call it Forge Domain Spells, just so that it's there, and then simply drag and drop these spells into that power group and delete the other empty spell group that was there. And now what happens is that all of your domain spells can be set up to be configured here. And you can go through and set up any base ability scores that you need to here to ensure that they make use of your character's wisdom score. So for example, any spell that drops in here will make use of wisdom, and these two should come into play as well. So this would be 8 plus your wisdom plus your proficiency bonuses. And if you want, you can set this to wisdom as well. And that way, anything that drops into here will automatically make use of your wisdom score when it comes to saving throws, attack rolls, stuff like that. And there are no daily use limitations. It comes down to how many spell slots you have, so you do not need to prepare these spells. Now, we're almost done with the setup of these Forge Domain spells. There's one more thing that we should really do, and that is actually to switch our group type to spells. And the reason we want to do that is because we want these spells to go away when we have no spell slots left. And the only way that works is if you set this up. However, you can leave the prepared requirement set at 0, so that even if you're in a combat mode and under actions, they will still be available for use. The other thing that I would recommend is updating this. This is actually a power group. That's the reason why these spells here are all grouped into one thing. We want to separate them out and also set that up as spells, but we want this to require preparation, although I'm not entirely certain whether you need a 1 there or not. Now what will happen is that when you go to your preparation selection, your cantrips remain as they normally should. You go through and you prepare the various spells that you can go through and set up. You don't need to set these up as prepared because they're kept in a separate spell group. Now when you're in combat and you're in actions and you go through and cast your spells, the minute you use your last spell slot, everything goes away except for your cantrips, and that's exactly what we want. And the other reason why I recommend you do that is because now at level 3, which I will show you when we get to level 3, when you drop this particular spell into the Forge Domain spells grouping here, it'll create a separate level 2 Forge Domain spell group. And then we can go through and show you how that gets set up. But before we get into that, we have a few more things to set up at level 1. Also at level 1, your character will gain access to 2 bonus proficiencies, one for heavy armor and another for smith tools. Now, I've already gone ahead and created a dwarvish cleric. In this particular case, they already gain access to smith tools. So I don't need to go ahead and add that in. However, as a dungeon master, I would permit you as a player the ability to go in and choose an additional tool proficiency if you so wish. Because in this particular case, it was the racial selection that gave me the smith's tools proficiency. Totally forgetting that the Forge Domain was also going to give that to me. I'm not going to do that here, but as a dungeon master, I would allow you to do that. I am, however, missing the heavy armor proficiency, so all I really have to do is go ahead and add heavy armor here. Oops, let's capitalize that so that everything's consistent. And that is all you have to do for the bonus proficiencies configuration. Finally, the last feature you gain at level 1 is called Blessing of the Forge, and this gives you the ability to imbue magic into weapons and armor. As long as your character completes a long rest, you can touch a single non-magical object that is either a simple or martial weapon or is a suit of armor. And based on your selection, you will have different results when you go and imbue magic into that particular object. If you chose a weapon, that weapon is now going to gain a +1 to its attack and damage bonuses until your character's next long rest, or until your character dies during combat, or some other reason. However, if you chose to imbue magic in a suit of armor, you won't be gaining a damage or attack bonus, but instead you will gain an AC bonus increase of +1 for that suit of armor. Once used, however, your character is going to need to complete a long rest to regain the means to use it again, but it essentially means you can always walk around with either an attack and damage bonus or an armor class bonus right at level 1. The last thing that I want to point out around this particular feature, though, is that if you chose a weapon as the object you're going to imbue magic into, it does not gain the magic property. It still acts as a straight slashing, straight piercing, or straight bludgeoning damage type weapon. You don't get to add the magical property according to the description in this feature. The way that Dungeons & Dragons works is they tend to be very specific when something like that changes. Because they're not actually stating that here, you don't get to do it. So how would you go through and actually configure this? Well, to make it the most flexible, you're going to want to add this to your Actions tab under the Forge of the Domain power group. And in this particular case, it's not going to be a spell. So Forge Domain. And then you're going to want to add 2 effects to this particular feature. There we go. The first effect we will set up for the damage. And this is going to be Blessing of the Forge, semicolon, and we want to add 2 bonuses to this. So we want to first add the ATK bonus of 1. Oops, that should be a 1. Semicolon, and DMG bonus, colon, 1. And what this will do is it will add these bonuses to your character, and it doesn't expend, it is on yourself, and it doesn't have an expiration on rounds. The second adjustment we're going to want to make is to this effect. And this is going to increase your armor class. And it's also called Blessing of the Forge. Extra letter in there, semicolon. But this time we want to do an AC 1. And it's also going to be on your character. It doesn't expire, and it also doesn't have a round deficiency, meaning that it would tick off after X number of rounds. So how are these going to work? Well, it's fairly straightforward. When you're in a combat situation, specifically when you're in the combat tracker, you can go ahead and at the time that your character has completed a long rest, make the decision. Do you want to do a weapon or do you want to do your armor class? Well, let's, for example, say that we chose a weapon. In this particular case, we're going to imbue our Warhammer here. So I'm going to go ahead and add this effect to my character. It's going to add this to the combat tracker and link this to our character. Now if I make an attack roll, pay very specific attention here to this attack bonus. I'm getting a +3 to the attack bonus. So when I roll, we see a +4 here. That means that it has added the attack +1. When I do damage, I'm not going to target anybody. We now see a +2 bonus here as opposed to the +1 bonus that is here. That means that our attack and our damage bonuses are working as we anticipate. We have also not changed the damage type that's being done, which means it's still going to fall under the bludgeoning category. And if we run across a creature that is magically resistant to bludgeoning, this weapon will not function properly, meaning we'll do half the amount of damage that we're doing, or if they're immune to bludgeoning damage, we're still going to be doing no damage to them. This is what we want. So how would the armor class check work? Well, once again, When your character has completed a long rest, you make the decision. In this case, we're going to go ahead and I believe we selected scale mail. Oops, inventory. Yep, scale mail. So we're going to imbue magic into our scale mail. It's going to add the AC1 bonus here, so that now if our character is attacked, which I'm probably going to do that from zombie because any of these other ones are going to just simply decimate this character at level 1, then we should see an armor class bonus be applied. So I'm going to temporarily set up zombie 1 as the person going, or the creature going, and I'm going to target our cleric. Now, you'll see in the result here, we have defense effects +1. That means that even though the zombie rolled a 21, it still hit because our armor class is only 20. If I roll again, see if I can't get something lower. There we go. The 6 misses. I'm wondering if I can actually get a 19 out of this. One moment. Let's see. Well, yeah, now I'm in the lows. All my good die rolls have gone. Well, that's a little bit higher. But you can still see that our defense bonus is coming into play. Okay, so that is a 19. That hits. Interesting. Oh, wait, the total was 21. That's why. Duh. In any event, we know it's working because we have this defense effects bonus here. If I remove that effect and then I make another attack with the zombie, you'll see that we will no longer have the defense effects notification here. Excellent. This means it's working the way that we wanted to, and of course now I roll the number that would have given me what I needed. Oh well. Excellent. It means that we are finished setting up, almost, Blessing of the Forge. There is one other thing that we need to do. It has a number of uses here, meaning that you have to complete a long rest. So we have to go through and make sure that we have a 1 here in order to ensure that we can only use it once per day. When your character reaches level 2, they will now gain access to the Channel Divinity Artisan's Blessing feature, which allows you to create non-magical items made of metal. As long as your character has placed out the required metals, they can begin an hour-long ritual that will create the desired item, even if it has non-metallic parts, as they will be magically created as needed. The total value of the item will not exceed 100 gold pieces in value, but can be anything from a simple key to a complete suit of armor or weapon as long as it falls within that gold piece restriction. These items are permanent and do not fade over time, but you will need to supply metallic components equal to the value of the item you intend to create, so there is a cost to it. It's not entirely free. For example, if you happen to find a broken sword and all of the pieces are there, you could theoretically cast this ritual and recreate that sword as you saw it, minus the broken state, out of that very same metallic component that existed there. There isn't any reason why you couldn't do that. Any leather pommeling that was there, anything else that happened to be there, would automatically be recreated at the time that you did that. However, if it happened to be a broken weapon that at one point in the past was magical, it would not regain any of its magical capabilities that it had prior. The only way that would work is if you actually took it to a proper blacksmith and had them magically recreate the weapon the way that they needed to in order to first imbue the enchantments into it. Essentially, this means that you won't have to go back into town to replace any of the equipment that you had on you that happened to break, as long as you have enough scrap metals laying around that you could use. However, it will not transmute one metal into another, say iron into mithril or bronze into gold, during that process. You have to have the metals that you intend to make the item out of on hand at the time that you do so. If you want a chainmail suit of armor, for example, and all you have was scrap iron, it would be made out of that very iron, as if the iron had been melted down and reforged by hand. As this is tied to your Channel Divinity feature, which means that you will only have one use until your character reaches level 6, where you will gain a second use, and at level 18, your character will finally have 3 uses before they will need to complete a long or a short rest in order to get it back. But before I continue, let's go ahead and drop our cleric level into place, which I seem to have forgotten to do. In any event, this would now allow us to add the Channel Divinity feature to our character. Because this is linked to our Channel Divinity feature, there are a few things we're going to want to do to make sure that everything functions the way that we need it to. The first is to drag your Channel Divinity feature from your primary class sheet into your Actions tab and call this Channel Divinity. And what that's going to do is allow us to create a power group where both the Artisan's Blessing and the Channel Divinity, and I believe it's Turn on Dead in this particular case. Yes, Turn on Dead. So I'm going to call that Turn on Dead. We can link them together in a way that ensures we only get one use per day out of the whole group. So now that they are both in this group, what we can do is open up this power group and set a daily use limitation here. And that links these two features into one use. So if you decide, for example, to go ahead and create that piece of armor, and then you make use of that feature, you'll notice that we lose the ability to make use of this Channel Divinity Turn on Dead feature. That's exactly how this should work. And at later levels, when we hit, I think it's level 14 or something higher, we're at 3 uses, then we can now mix and match. And when we go ahead and complete a long rest, they will all return. Correction, you gain your 3rd use at level 18, not level 14. I apologize. So let's go ahead and put this back to 1. The other thing that we're going to want to do is make sure that this is using our character's wisdom capabilities for everything that we do in this group. And the reason for that is specifically for this Channel Divinity Turn on Dead feature. It was a much lower roll. Now it is set up to be properly configured to make use of our wisdom. And that's all we have to do to go ahead and set up this particular feature within our Channel Divinity setting and keep it linked. So at level 3, we are going to gain the means of adding 2 new Forge Domain spells to our Actions tab. And you want to be very careful as to where you drop these. You want to make sure that you drop them into the group called Forge Domain Spells. And what that's going to do is it's going to create a new group, but with a level 2 indicator next to it. And then you can simply drop your second one into there. Oops, apparently I did that one twice. Oops. All right, let's delete that. Now, the one thing that we will need to do is make sure that it is also set up to use these settings, which it looks like it is. We don't need to go ahead and make any adjustments. If we open that up and we open this up, we see we get the same thing. But if we open up this, we see we get a different power group with different settings. This is exactly what we want. We also will not need to prepare these spells. So if we switch to combat, we can see that these become available. And if we go to Actions and minimize everything, we can see that our uses still show up. Whereas if we go through and burn through our spells here, for example, then it would go through and go away. Additionally, if we have now used our spell slots all up, the only things we should see will be our Forge Domain functionality here, which is our feature, our cantrips, as well as our Channel Divinity capability. This is working the way that we need it to. Excellent. So let me just clear these out. Oops. And there we go. That goes through and sets up our 3rd level unlocking of heat metal and magical weapons, despite the fact that the spells are, in fact, 2nd level. The same thing needs to happen when your character hits level 5. So go ahead and simply drag these spells into an existing Forge Domain group, and everything will be automatically set up and ready to go. You don't have to really worry about too much. At level 6, your character will have to make 2 adjustments. The first will be to your Channel Divinity feature. Specifically to the power group, you want to increase the number of daily uses that your character is going to have to 2. The second is that your character is now going to unlock a new feature called Soul of the Forge, which grants your character resistance to fire damage and an automatic +1 armor class bonus to any heavy armor that your character is wearing. This is in addition to the armor class bonus that you would gain through Blessing of the Forge. Additionally, if you had a suit of plate mail armor at some point later on in your character's career that happened to have a +2 magical bonus to that armor class, unlike Blessing of the Forge, this armor class bonus would apply to that armor. And the resistance to fire damage does not require your character to be wearing armor, but the armor class does. It could potentially be argued, however, that any equipment you are wearing would not be resistant, as it does not explicitly state that resistance extends to those particular pieces of equipment. It simply states that your character gains the resistance. But to be honest, it really is going to be entirely up to the Dungeon Master to decide how that is going to play out in their own campaign, so it is best to ask. Now, there are a couple of ways that you could set up the armor class bonus within this particular feature. The first is that you could simply go to your main tab and modify the armor segment here and add in a miscellaneous bonus of +1 whenever your character is wearing heavy armor. I would argue that that could get quite cumbersome because every time you don the armor, you would have to come in and add it. Every time you remove the armor, you would have to come in and remove it. And if you're not wearing heavy armor at the time, but you were prior, you might forget to switch this. So a better option is to create an effect for it, much like we did with Blessing of the Forge. So I'm going to create a new feature, or group, new entry here. That's the word I'm looking for. And I'm going to add in 2 things. The first is I'm going to add 2 separate effects so that you can control these independently. First, let's deal with the resistance to fire damage. So we first want to go through and create Soul of the Forge. I can't type today. There we go. And what we are going to gain is resist to fire. And that's all we have to do to set this up. It's going to be on your character, and it's not going to expire, nor is it going to have a duration. And in fact, this is permanent. As long as your character is alive, you will be resistant to fire damage. The second option is very similar to what we did up here with the armor class. But in this particular case, we're going to set it up for when you're wearing heavy armor, even though this is something that you're going to be toggling on and off. So it's called Soul of the Forge. And in brackets, I'm going to put in heavy armor as an indication to you that you need to add this effect when you're wearing heavy armor and remove the effect when you're not. And it's still just going to be an AC bonus 1. And it is also going to be on your character. And I'm not sure where that plus came into there. And that's all we have to do to set up the actual effects. Now let's show you how they work. So if we go back into the combat tracker, I currently have no effects on this character. I'm going to go ahead and add the resistance to fire damage. So I've gone ahead and added an Ifriti here, or an Ifrit, I can't recall whether the I is pronounced or not, to our combat tracker. I'm going to set that creature up so that it goes ahead and targets our cleric. And let's just make the assumption that I have hit. I'm going to make use of a scimitar here that has a slashing damage that includes fire damage. Yes, that's 4d6. So, we have the resistance component here, and we also have a partially resisted aspect here. There was a total of 18 points of damage here, but the resisted part is the fire part. So I'm going to temporarily heal up our character, remove the resistance on that, and re-roll that damage just to show you that that's in fact what it was. And as you can see, this time they took full damage. That's because there was no resistance to fire. So we know this is working. So let's reapply that effect because technically it should always be there. Now, scale mail is classified as medium armor. In order for the next aspect of this feature to work, our character should technically be wearing heavier armor. But for the purposes of this example, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to simply apply the effect. And what we should see is when I make an attack roll here, we should once again see the defense effect in play. Now you'll see that it is +1. If this character was wearing heavy armor that was not magical, they could theoretically also cast or make use of the Blessing of the Forge feature on top of this and gain a +2 bonus, so that if I attack again, theoretically we should see a +2 to our defense effects. Excellent. That's working the way that we want it to. And the last thing that I would like to point out around this particular feature is that unlike Blessing of the Forge, this doesn't have a per use restriction, meaning it's always available as long as the conditions apply. So in the case of the heavy armor aspect here, we'd have to remove that, but Blessing of the Forge would be around if we had chosen to actually enchant the armor that we were wearing at the time with the +1 bonus. So we didn't necessarily have to get rid of that, but resist fire remains. And that sets everything up for Solo the Forge. At level 7, you will once again gain access to 2 new Forge Domain spells. So let's just simply go ahead and drag them into an existing Forge Domain power group for the spells, and it will automatically create the group and store those spells in there. And that's all you have to do at level 7. So the next feature your character is going to gain happens at level 8, and it is called Divine Strike, and in brackets Forge Domain. And it will grant your character a means to add an additional 1d8 of fire damage to any weapon your character is wielding at earlier levels. When you hit level 14, you will be able to increase that. This can be used every turn, and it can be used multiple times if your character is dual wielding, although a cleric would suffer the normal dual wielding penalties while doing so. When your character reaches level 14, the amount of damage they will do will increase from 1d8 to 2d8. However, there is no rest requirement, so it might be wise to set this up as an effect that is always going to be available to your character when in combat situations. And what I mean by that is to go ahead and add this into your Actions tab and throw it under the Forge Domain. You will see here that the effect is already set up, and you can either honor the on the next roll thing and just leave it there, or you can get rid of it, because it doesn't actually state that it goes away. So theoretically, you could leave that in place, but I would suggest leaving the on the next roll part so that it expires after you complete a roll, and then on your next attack, just keep adding it in. Because who knows, you might not attack with a weapon next time, you might attack with a fist, and in that particular case, it wouldn't apply, because you have to be wielding a weapon. You can't simply hit it with your fist and have this apply. So let's show you what that looks like in a combat scenario. So I've set it up where the cleric has the turn token, if you will, and I'm about to attack the Ifrit with a weapon. So I'm going to go ahead and target that attack, although an Ifrit's probably a bad example because it's resistant to fire. So let's go ahead and attack this dragon instead. So I'm going to make sure that I make my attack roll, and in this case that's a miss. Next round, that's still a miss. Third round, still a miss. Fourth round, come on, hit. There we go. That's going to be a hit. Excellent. Now, before I roll the damage, what I can actually do is go ahead and apply this fire damage effect. Now, when I roll this damage, we should see 2 d8 die that are rolled. One that will do physical damage, in this case bludgeoning. The second will do fire damage, and you can see that here. And you can always make sure that you got the extra die roll because it will be purple. Excellent. That is working the way that we want it to. So that means we've gone ahead and set up Divine Strike the way that we need to. When we get to level 14, I will show you what you need to do there. So at level 9, you will need to go ahead and make the last Forge Domain spell adjustment. And that's simply, as we've done before, grabbing the spells and simply dropping them into place. And you will see that it will go ahead and create a new group specific to your Forge spells. And that completes everything that's going to happen when it comes to Forge Domain spells. At level 14, you're going to want to make sure that you adjust your Divine Strike feature to add in the extra damage. So you're going to want to modify this effect and simply change the 1d8 to 2d8 of fire damage. And that'll go ahead and set that up for you. The last feature your character is going to gain happens at level 17, and it is called Saint of the Forge and Fire. The damage resistance you gained with the Soul of the Forge feature is now transformed into complete immunity to fire damage, meaning your character can simply walk into a wall of fire and take no damage. Not necessarily the character's equipment, but the character themselves. Your character is also going to gain some resistances to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing attacks from non-magic weapons when wearing heavy armor, which are always going to be there as long as your character wears that armor. And this complements the armor class bonus that you get with Soul of the Forge as well. And as I've stated earlier, the same restrictions on whether the immunity extends to your equipment will also apply, but it is again going to be entirely up to your DM. So let's go ahead and add this to our Actions tab here, and I'm going to copy the Forge Domain there and paste that into place. Now I'm going to add 2 effects to this. The first is going to be the normal effect and another effect for that. And we're going to deal with the immunity to fire damage first. So this is called Saint of the Forge and Fire, semicolon, immune, colon, fire. And it's always going to be on you, does not expire, doesn't have a round expiration. The second one is going to be a little bit trickier to deal with. We can set this up by once again giving it the same description, Saint of, and that's capital S, Forge and Fire, and I just realized I need to adjust this effect. Get rid of the in there, because there is no the. Semicolon, and we want to go resist, colon, move that out of the way, and what we want is bludgeoning, piercing, slashing damage, non-magic, like this. And what that will tell the game is that you will be resistant to bludgeoning damage, piercing damage, or slashing damage, rather, not slacking damage. Oops. As long as it's not magical. And it will be on yourself, and it doesn't expire or have a turn removal. And that goes ahead and sets that up. So how is your character going to make use of these new effects in the combat tracker? Well, the first thing that's going to happen is you can now remove this resistance to fire and add in the effect for immunity to fire. The second is, and it will only apply as long as your character is wearing heavy armor, is to apply this effect here. And if you are in fact wearing heavy armor, you could go ahead and apply the Soul of the Forge armor class bonus. Both of these would come into play. So let's go ahead and show how this is going to work. So I've set it up that the Succubus has the initiative and has targeted the Cleric for their attacks. If I make the attack, in this case it's going to be a miss, you will see that the defense effects are working the way that we think they should. But let's say that the Succubus actually hit. The Succubus has non-magic damage on their claws. So in this particular case, I rolled a 1d6. It had a +3 to its damage bonus, giving a total of 7, but you'll see we only took 3 points of damage. That's because we have resisted. If I were to grant one of these characters a magical attack weapon, let's see if I actually have one, then what would actually happen is that the full amount of that damage would come through. So let me go through, see if I can't set something up. So I've quickly gone ahead and added a flying sword now to our combat tracker. This thing's just getting full. And I currently have the cleric targeted. So even with all of these immunities here, if I go through and hit the cleric with damage, I've temporarily set up this sword so that it's doing slashing magic damage. You'll see that there's no resistance here. That means it's bypassing the amount of damage that's being done here. Now, if I take a normal flying sword, I'm going to call this 2 for now, and drop it into place, and we now have flying sword 3. That is a non-modified flying sword. If I use that sword to target and attack the cleric, and I roll the slashing damage without the magic property, you'll see that there's a partially resistant feature here. So we know this is working the way that we want it to. That means we have set up Saint of Forge and Fire the way that we need it to. The last adjustment you're going to want to make to your character will happen at level 18, and that's really so that your Artisan's Blessing feature here can take full advantage of your Channel Divinity feature. And what you want to do is modify the Channel Divinity group so that it now has 3 daily uses. And as we stated earlier, because they are linked, you now have the ability to make them go away on the off chance that you have used them all up. So if we go back and restore that, and we go back here, we can see that everything is there. And if I go through and use them in any order, it will just go away. So we know this is working the way that we want it to, based on the number of uses that we have available, and that these two are linked to one another. And that actually completes setting up everything for the Forge Domain class specialization. This video is a little longer than I wanted it to be. It'll be roughly around 40 some odd minutes. However, we've covered pretty much everything that the Forge Domain needs in order to function. A little bit more than required because we covered some of the Channel Divinity capabilities that came through from our Cleric class, but nothing that was really extravagant in what we did, because all we did was set up a grouped power group, if you will. Which brings me to the conclusion. Even though this particular domain came from Xanathar's Guide to Everything, the Forge Domain clerics sound a little less capable than the Artificer classes that were introduced with Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. But I do still feel it has its use and could be a very enjoyable character to play. I look forward to seeing what one or more players might come up with around this particular type of class and see how they run. I've never played one of these particular characters, so I don't know. However, this does bring us to the end of this video. I hope you found it useful and informative, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. I wish to thank you for taking the time to watch this particular video. I hope you found it informative and useful to familiarizing yourself with Fantasy Grounds in general, and that you had fun in the process. If you found the video useful and you liked the content of the particular video, go ahead and click that like button to let me know. And if you have any questions specific to the topic covered by this particular video, or just have some comments in general, please feel free to post something in the comments section, and I will do my best to respond to any questions that are asked. Additionally, I do release content quite regularly, and it's generally specific to Fantasy Grounds or 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons at this time. So if you'd like to be notified when new videos come out, go ahead and subscribe and click the notification bell to ensure that notification is sent to you when I release a new video.